Welcome to Starbound's Fantasy channel. My name is Carol, and I'll be your narrator for today. Before we get started with the story, go ahead, check and make sure that you're subscribed. It's 100% free, and it allows our stories to pop up in your feed more often. With that, let's get started. The elven blade caught sunlight, prismatic and perfect in its arc as it descended toward Waylon's unprotected head. He pivoted at the last moment, his hammer rising to meet it. Crude black iron against starlight metal. The elf's lip curled. Your kind never learns. That hammer will shatter. But when the weapons met, the hammer didn't break. It rang. A single clear note that lingered in the air between them, resonant and haunting. The elf hesitated, ears twitching toward the sound. Waylon used that heartbeat of confusion to step inside the elf's guard. He drove his shoulder into the taller figure's chest. The elf stumbled backward, golden eyes wide with indignation more than fear. He recovered his balance with liquid grace and sheathed his sword. A practice match is hardly worth bloodshed, he said, as though he hadn't been the one to escalate their sparring. Another time, perhaps. Waylon watched him retreat toward the grove where the elven traders had established their seasonal market. Their weapons gleamed against the trees, beautiful artifacts that caught light and refused to release it. Perfect, untouchable, cold. You shouldn't antagonize them, came a gentle voice from behind him. Waylon turned to find his mother, Rayleigh, gathering herbs along the meadow's edge. The basket balanced at her hip overflowed with spring flowers and bitter roots. Her hands were stained green from her work. The elves bring what we need to survive winter. They bring trinkets and take our grain, Waylon said, hefting his hammer onto his shoulder. And they think we should thank them for the privilege. Rayleigh laughed. Such certainty in one so young, she said, moving to his side. She reached up to brush his dark hair from his eyes, a gesture unchanged since childhood. Despite himself, he leaned into her touch. Their kind lives for centuries, Waylon. They've forgotten more than we'll ever learn. That doesn't make them right. She studied him, the son who'd inherited her stubborn jaw and none of her patience. No, she agreed finally. It doesn't. But it makes them dangerous when provoked. She nodded toward his hammer. What does old Bren say about your work today? That my strikes are more heart than precision. Waylon grimaced. He says I need discipline. Waylon looked away. At 17, he was nearly a grown man. But under his mother's gaze, he felt like a child caught stealing apples. Steal should save, not only destroy, Rayleigh said, echoing the words she'd been teaching him since he was old enough to understand death. She touched his cheek, a healer's gesture, checking for fever. When you forge with anger, you only forge pain. What should I forge with? Her smile was tired, but genuine. Memory, she said. Memory and love. The things that last. Waylon would remember those words months later, when he found his mother's body in the ashes of the healing house. The elven raiders had come without warning, a midnight storm of silver armor and cold efficiency. They claimed justice for an elven noble found dead on the border. They called it reciprocity, as if one life equaled a village. The healing house had been their first target, perhaps because it was where the wounded from previous skirmishes recovered. Perhaps because it stood apart from the village proper. By the time Waylon reached it, there was little left to save. He found Rayleigh beside 3 human soldiers she'd been trying to protect. She dragged them toward the back door despite her slender frame, leaving bloody handprints on the floor. An elven arrow pinned her sleeve to the doorframe. 3 more pierced her back. Mother! His voice broke on the word, a boy's sound from a man's throat, Her eyes flickered open, cloudy with pain. Waylon. Her breathing was wet and labored. Listen carefully. He knelt beside her, afraid to move her, afraid to leave her, afraid of time itself. I'm here. My death is not your forge, she whispered. Do you understand? You must not build yourself from this moment. Don't, he begged. The other healers will come too late. Her hand found his, weak but insistent. Promise me, you will not let this break you into something unrecognizable. He couldn't answer, wouldn't lie. She gripped his hand tighter, with strength he hadn't known she still possessed. The soul remembers, Waylon. It carries every moment. Promise me you'll remember more than this one. I promise, he said, the words hollow in his chest. She nodded once, satisfied, and her eyes drifted past him to some unseen horizon. There, she murmured. There you are. And then she was gone. Waylon stayed beside her until dawn, until the village emerged to count their dead. Until they tried to pull him gently away. He shrugged them off and lifted his mother himself, carrying her through the market square where the elves traded their perfect, soulless trinkets, and toward home. Old Bren's forge hadn't seen fire in days, not since the raid. The anvil stood cold and accusatory, under a layer of ash when Waylon pushed open the heavy door. He'd expected emptiness. Instead, he found his mentor hunched over strange diagrams and the dim light of a single candle. Come in or stay out, Bren growled without looking up. Close the damn door either way. Waylon stepped inside and let the door swing shut behind him. You weren't at the memorial. No point in watching good folk put in the ground, Bren said, still studying his parchments. Better to make sure no more join 'em. Now Bren looked up, his weathered face shadowed by the candlelight. His left eye, milky with cataract, seemed to glow. He gestured to the seat across from him. Sit down, boy. You look half dead yourself. Waylon remained standing. I want a sword. Course you do. Every lad who loses someone wants a blade to make the world pay. Bren's voice was unsympathetic. And I'm telling you, sit down. Something in the old smith's tone, not kind but uncompromising, broke through Waylon's haze of grief. He sat. Bren pushed the parchment toward him. Tell me what you see. Waylon stared at the diagrams. They showed a forge, but unlike any he'd studied in his apprenticeship. The fire pit was deeper, ringed with strange runes. The anvil was inscribed with flowing script that hurt his eyes to follow. And the methods. This isn't possible, he said finally. Not with that attitude. No, I mean... Waylon traced the sequence with his finger. You're describing quenching hot steel in blood. The metal would warp. It would be worse than useless. Not if the blood is freely given, Bren said. Not if it carries memory. Waylon looked up sharply. What is this? Bren sat back, something like approval in his roomy eyes. Soul steel, he said. The old way. Before the elves taught us to make pretty, lifeless blades. I've never heard of it. Course not. They buried it. Both sides did. Humans because it was too much responsibility. The elves because they couldn't replicate it. Bren's voice lowered. They can make metal that catches starlight, but they can't make it remember. Can't make it sing. Waylon's mind raced. This is forbidden magic. No magic to it. Just truth. Bren tapped the parchment. A blade quenched in blood carries the moment of its making. A blade. quenched in freely given blood, offered in love or protection. That blade carries the soul's purpose, its memory. And what does it do? Makes a weapon that fights alongside you, not just for you. Bren's voice softened for the first time. It makes a legacy that outlasts death. Waylon's heart thundered in his chest. My mother would have hated this, Bren finished for him. Make no mistake, boy. This is not what she would have chosen. You're saying I could bring her back? No. Bren's voice was sharp. Nothing brings back the dead. This is resonance, not resurrection. The soul echoes in the steel, but it's not trapped. Can leave if it chooses. It stays because it wants to protect. His gaze was uncomfortably direct. Your mother was a healer. Are you certain she'd choose to become a weapon, even for you? Waylon closed his eyes. He saw her again, not as she was at the end, but as she had been in life. Her hands gentle on fevered brows, her voice steady even in crisis. Steel should save, not only destroy. Yes, he said finally. To protect? She would. Bren studied him for a long moment. Then we begin tomorrow, at dawn. He gathered his parchments. And Waylon, once started, this cannot be undone. For either of you. The ritual took days. First, the gathering. Bren sent Waylon to collect soil from Rayleigh's grave, water from the spring where she gathered herbs, and ash from the healing house where she died. These he mixed together into the clay that would form the sword's mold. The vessel must know its purpose, Bren explained as they worked the clay by moonlight. Must carry the shape of the life it'll hold. Second, the forging. They heated the material. Not pure steel, but an alloy of iron, carbon, and scraps from the healing house. A broken scalpel, the metal rim of a medicine bowl, the buckle from Rayleigh's favorite apron. As the metal liquefied, Waylon spoke his mother's name into the flames, not in summoning, but in memory. Blade must know who it becomes, Bren instructed, his voice steady over the roar of the bellows. Third, the shaping. For 3 days they hammered the steel into form. Not the elegant curve of an elven blade, but something simpler. A straight edge with a subtle tip. A healer's blade, designed for precision rather than spectacle. With each strike, Waylon spoke a memory aloud. His mother singing in the garden. Her hands, sure and gentle, splinting his broken arm. Her laugh like water over stone. The metal must hold memory before it can hold a soul, Bren murmured as they worked through the night. Speak truly, or not at all. Fourth, the binding. On the final day, as the blade took form, Waylon cut his palm and let 7 drops of blood fall onto the red-hot steel. The metal hissed, but instead of warping, it seemed to drink the offering. The color shifted, not to the starlight silver of elven blades, but to a deeper hue, almost purple in certain light. Blood calls to blood, Bren said. The vessel recognizes its keeper. Finally, the awakening. As dusk approached on the 7th day, Bren instructed Waylon to heat the blade one last time. When it glowed orange-white, Waylon carried it to the quenching barrel. But instead of water or oil, the barrel contained a mixture that Bren had prepared in secret. Herbs from Rayleigh's garden, water from the spring, and a single drop of blood from each person she had saved over the years, freely given when they learned the purpose. Ask her, Bren said as Waylon held the blazing sword over the barrel. Not with your voice, with your heart. Waylon closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw his mother as she had been in life. Strong, gentle, fierce in protection. He felt the weight of her absence like a physical wound. I miss you, he thought. I need you. Not to fight my battles, but to remind me why they matter." And then he plunged the sword into the barrel. The metal screamed, a high, thin sound that pierced the air like a woman's cry. Steam erupted from the barrel, carrying the scent of spring herbs and copper. The forge went dark as every flame extinguished simultaneously. In the sudden silence, Waylon heard it, a soft, rhythmic humming, like a lullaby without words. The sound came from the barrel, from the cooling metal within. With trembling hands, he reached into the now tepid liquid and drew out the sword. It wasn't beautiful, not by elven standards. The metal was dark, almost black, with a subtle purple sheen that caught the fading light. The blade was plain, unadorned, but it hummed in his grip, a vibration he felt in his bones more than heard. "Mother?" he whispered. The sword pulsed once in his hand, a single, gentle beat, like a heart answering, and from somewhere beyond hearing, a voice whispered his name. "Waylon." It wasn't speech, not exactly. More like the memory of his name in his mother's voice, carried on a breath of wind. Bren watched from the shadows, his expression unreadable. "What will you call it?" Waylon remembered his mother's words, her last lesson. Steel should save, not only destroy. "Mercy," he said, and the sword hummed in recognition. "Her name is Mercy." The first time Waylon used Mercy in combat, he nearly died from hesitation. The elven raiders returned a month after the forging, a smaller band this time, scouts rather than soldiers, seeking information. They attacked at dusk, emerging from the forest like the shadows given form. Waylon was at the village perimeter, helping rebuild the eastern wall when the first arrows fell. 2 guards dropped before anyone registered the attack. The third arrow would have taken Waylon through the throat if Mercy hadn't moved. He felt it then, the sword shifting in its scabbard, pulling his hand to its hilt. When his fingers closed around the grip, the world slowed. Not by magic, but by shared awareness. "Left," came the thought, in a voice like his mother's, but not quite. "Now." Waylon pivoted left without questioning, drawing Mercy in a single fluid motion. The blade intercepted the arrow mid-flight, not with the sharp edge, which would have glanced it off the shaft, but with the flat, batting it aside. The sword moved with him, or perhaps he moved with it, neither leading, neither following, a dance between memory and motion. The elven scout who'd fired the arrow stepped from the tree line, another already knocked. His golden eyes widened at the sight of Waylon's blade. "That sword," he said in accented common tongue. "It moved before you did." Waylon felt Mercy hum in his grip, a warning. "You killed 2 men who were rebuilding homes, not fortifications," he said, advancing slowly. "Why?" The elf's face hardened. "The court demands information. Your village harbors a forbidden thing." "You found it!" Waylon raised the sword. The elf fired. This time, Waylon didn't hesitate. Mercy guided his hand, turning just enough to catch the arrow on the blade's edge. The shaft split with a sharp crack. The elf dropped his bow and drew twin daggers, each gleaming with that unearthly elven luminescence. The elf moved with inhuman grace, his daggers leaving trails of light and deepening gloom. But for every thrust, Mercy had an answer. Not faster, but precision, as though the sword anticipated each attack before it began. The elf's frustration mounted with each failed strike. "Fight me properly!" he demanded. "Not with this corrupted magic!" "No magic," Waylon said, echoing Bren's words. "Just blood and soul." And then Mercy guided his hand into an opening he hadn't seen, a gap in the elf's guard created by overconfidence. The dark blade slid forward and opened a thin line along the elf's ribs. The elf gasped, more in shock than pain. He staggered back, pressing a hand to the wound. When it came away with wet, silver-blue blood, his expression shifted from disdain to something like fear. "That blade," he said. "It sang." Waylon felt it then, the low, mournful hum that emanated from Mercy. Not a battle cry, but a lament. The sound of his mother's grief at causing pain, even in defense. "Go back to your court," Waylon said, lowering the sword. "Tell them we are not defenseless." The elf retreated, gathering his wounded companions. At the forest's edge, he paused. "This isn't finished," he said, but the threat sounded hollow, undermined by uncertainty. After they vanished into the trees, Waylon stood alone in the gathering dark, Mercy still humming softly in his grip. He felt the weight of what he'd done, not the fight itself, but the unveiling. The world now knew what he and Bren had created. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. The question meant for the sword, for the echo of his mother within it. The blade warmed in his hand, not with heat, but with something like reassurance. The humming changed pitch, becoming almost melodic. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. Word spread. Not quickly. There were no ravens or messengers, but like water finding its way downhill, inevitable and unstoppable. By midwinter, people began arriving in Sarn. They came alone or in pairs, these pilgrims of grief. A woman who'd lost her husband in a border skirmish. A father whose daughter had been taken by fever. A soldier with one arm, seeking to honor his fallen companions. All came to Waylon with the same request, a blade to carry their loved ones' memories. He refused them all. "This isn't a trade," he told a weeping mother who'd traveled 20 days through snow. "I can't sell you your daughter's soul." "I'm not asking you to sell it," she said, her voice rough with exhaustion. "I'm asking you to have it, to give her purpose beyond the grave." "That's not my decision to make." "No," she agreed. "It's hers. And mine. We've made it." Still, he refused, until the dreams began. They came first as fragments, faces he didn't recognize, pleading for his help, voices calling from formless dark. But gradually, they coalesced into a single reoccurring dream, a vast forge where spirits gathered, watching him with patient eyes. "They're waiting," Mercy whispered in these dreams, as I waited. "For what?" he asked. "Purpose. A vessel for what remains." He woke from these dreams drenched in sweat, Mercy humming beside his bed. The sword never spoke directly, not in waking hours, but he felt its concern like a physical touch. He sought out Bren. The old smith listened without interruption as Waylon described the dreams. When Waylon finished, Bren nodded once, as though confirming a suspicion. "The dead speak to those who listen," he said. "Always have." "But why me? Why now?" "'Cause you opened the door," Bren said simply. "You reminded the world that death isn't an ending. It's a transition." Waylon thought of the pilgrims he'd turned away, of their grief so similar to his own, of the purpose Mercy had given him when he might otherwise have been consumed by vengeance. "I'll help them," he decided, "but not as a business." Bren smiled for the first time in months. "Then I'll teach you." Spring brought more pilgrims, and with them, whispers from Thalaris, the elven capital. Rumors of discord in the Eternal Court, of factions arguing over how to respond to the human village that created weapons with souls. Waylon paid little attention to these murmurs. He was consumed by his work, learning the subtle variations of the forging ritual, understanding how different relationships required different approaches. A husband's blade for his wife sang differently than a mother's for her child. A friend's sword moved differently than a lover's. Each blade took on qualities of the soul it carried. A warrior's sword was quick to engage but slow to withdraw. A healer's blade, like mercy, sought precision over power, the cleanest cut rather than the deepest. And each blade, once awakened, hummed with its own unique song. Together in the growing collection that hung on the forge's walls, they created a choir of remembrance. It was this chorus that drew Saren Valus to Sarn. He arrived on a rain-soaked evening, a slender figure in a sodden cloak, his elven features partially concealed by a deep hood. He didn't announce himself or seek permission. Waylon found him standing in the open doorway of the forge, listening to the swords sing. "They're in harmony," the elf said without turning. His voice was lighter than Waylon expected, almost musical. Each distinct but supporting the others, like a family speaking. Waylon approached cautiously. Since the scout's attack, no elf had entered Sarn willingly. "You hear them?" The stranger lowered his hood, revealing features that marked him instantly as elven, the tapered ears, the luminous golden eyes. But unlike the elves Waylon had encountered, his expression held no disdain, only wonder. "Of course I hear them," he said. "They're hardly being subtle." Something in his tone, wry, almost conspiratorial, eased Waylon's suspicion. "Most of your kind pretend not to notice." "Most of my kind pretend many things." The elf turned fully, offering a formal bow. "Saren Valus, formerly House Thaloris, currently nowhere in particular." "You're an exile." "A self-imposed correction of circumstance," Saren said with a hint of smile. "The court and I had irreconcilable differences regarding the value of honesty." "And what brings you to Sarn?" Saren gestured toward the swords. "Curiosity. Fascination. A desire to understand what my people fear so deeply that they won't speak its name." His golden eyes held Waylon's. "They call you the Soulbinder and Thaloris." "That's not what I do." "No?" Saren stepped further into the forge, examining the blades with open interest. "What would you call it, then?" Waylon considered the question. "Remembering," he said finally. "I help the dead be remembered, and the living remember." "Kinder framing than the courts." Saren reached toward one of the swords, a short, broad blade forged for a farmer's wife. "May I?" Waylon hesitated, then nodded. Saren lifted the sword carefully, holding it as one might hold a wounded bird. The blade hummed softly in his grip, a questioning note. "Hello, friend," Saren murmured to the sword. "Thank you for allowing me to hold you." To Waylon's surprise, the sword's hum deepened, taking on an almost contented quality. It was the first time he'd seen a soul steel blade respond positively to an elf. "How did you do that?" he asked. Saren replaced the sword gently on its rack. "I asked permission," he said simply. "Something my kind rarely bothers to do with yours." He turned back to Waylon. "I'd like to learn, if you're willing to teach." "Learn what exactly?" "Everything." Saren's expression was earnest now, stripped of its earlier playfulness. "How the blades are made, how they sing, how they remember." His voice lowered. "My people have forgotten so much, Waylon of Sarn. We live for centuries, but our memories grow thin, polished smooth by time until they hold no pain, no texture." He gestured to the swords. "These remember everything. The rough edges, the grief, the love." Waylon studied the elf, searching for deception and finding none. "Why would an elf want to remember pain?" "Because without it, joy loses meaning." Saren's golden eyes were solemn. My people value beauty above all else. We've forgotten that beauty without contrast is just emptiness. The words resonated with something Waylon had felt but couldn't articulate. The fundamental difference between elven craft and human work. Elven blades were perfect, but cold. Soulsteel was flawed, but alive. It won't be easy, he warned. The Forge doesn't always welcome strangers. Saren smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his austere features. Then we'll have to convince it I'm not a stranger. Just a friend it hasn't met yet. Saren proved an apt pupil, if an unconventional one. Where Waylon approached the Forge with reverence, Saren brought curiosity. Where Waylon saw tradition, Saren asked questions. Why 7 days? He asked on their third morning. Why not 6? Or 8? Because that's how it's done, Waylon answered, automatically repeating Bren's lesson. But why? Saren pressed, examining a half-formed blade with critical eyes. Is there something magical about the number 7? There's no magic in Soulsteel. So you keep saying. And yet... Saren gestured to Mercy, which hung at Waylon's hip, humming softly as always. That blade moves before you do. It sings, it dreams. If not magic, what would you call it? Waylon had no answer. Not then. But the question lingered, forcing him to reconsider what he thought he knew. Together, they explored the limits of Soulsteel. They discovered that a blade quenched at dawn carried a different timbre than one finished at dusk. That souls who had unfinished business sang more clearly than those who had died content. That the deeper the bond between forger and soul, the more responsive the blade. And Saren brought his own knowledge, ancient elven texts smuggled from Thaloris, histories that had been suppressed for centuries. Look here, he said one evening, spreading a fragile parchment on the workbench. The script was flowing Elven, but parts had been roughly translated into human common tongue. From the Second Age, before the Sundering. Waylon leaned closer, struggling to decipher the faded words. The human smith binds memory to metal, he read slowly. A crude magic, but effective. Their blades carry intent beyond their wielder's skill. Keep reading, Saren urged. We attempted to replicate their methods using purer metals and more precise rituals. The results were disappointing. The blades remained inert. When questioned, the human smith laughed. Your kind fears feeling too deeply, he said. Metal remembers what it drinks in formation. Your blood runs too cold to sing. Waylon looked up, meeting Saren's golden eyes. This is why the elves fear Soulsteel. Not because it's abhorrent, but because it's uniquely human. A power we cannot replicate, Saren agreed. No matter how superior our craftsmanship, we cannot make metal live. His expression was thoughtful. It makes one wonder what else we've forgotten in our pursuit of perfection. As they worked together, Waylon began to notice changes in himself. The nightmares that had plagued him since forging Mercy, dreams of his mother's death, of fire and screaming, began to fade. In their place came different dreams. His mother in her garden, hands stained green with herbs, her voice singing old work songs as she ground medicines. Not memories of her death, but of her life. But other changes were less welcome. He found himself more sensitive to the pain of others, especially those who came seeking Soulsteel. When they spoke of their lost ones, he felt their grief as physical pressure against his skin. When they wept, he tasted salt, though no tears touched his lips. And when new Soulsteel awoke, he heard its first song before anyone else, a moment of confusion, of transition, of a soul finding its voice in metal. The price of being a doorway, Bren explained, when Waylon finally admitted these experiences. You stand between worlds now, lad. The dead speak through you. I never asked for that. No one asks for their calling, the old smith said. It asks for them. The summons from Thaloris came with the first frost of autumn. Not a messenger, but a formal delegation. 12 elven knights in silver armor, their cloaks embroidered with the sigil of the Eternal Court. They didn't enter Sarn. They made camp at the edge of the forest and sent a single herald to deliver their message. The Council of Elders demanded the humans cease creating soul steel and surrender all existing blades for destruction. And if we refuse? Waylon asked, though he already knew the answer. The herald's face remained impassive. Then the court will consider it an act of aggression against the peace established after the last border war. A peace your scouts violated when they murdered our healer, Waylon reminded him. Unfortunate excesses by individuals acting without sanction, the herald said, the words clearly rehearsed. The court regrets any suffering caused. Does it? Waylon felt Mercy hum at his hip, not in threat, but in sorrow. Strange that this regret comes only after we found a way to defend ourselves. The herald's composure slipped, just for a moment. The human ability to bind souls violates natural law, he said, his voice lowering. The dead should rest, not be imprisoned in metal. They aren't imprisoned, Waylon said. They stay willingly. They protect those they love. So you claim. The herald's gaze shifted to Mercy. And yet, they cannot speak for themselves. Waylon felt Mercy warm against his leg. Without conscious thought, his hand moved to the hilt. The moment his fingers touched the metal, the sword began to sing. Not the usual soft hum, but a clear, pure note that cut through the autumn air like a bird song through fog. The herald stepped back, his eyes wide. Silence that thing. She speaks for herself, Waylon said quietly. You just don't like what she's saying. The herald recovered his composure with visible effort. The court's position is unchanged. You have until the winter solstice to comply. After that... He left the threat hanging. As he departed, Waylon found Saren waiting by the forge, his expression troubled. And now? Saren asked. What will you do now? Waylon looked toward the forest, where 12 elven knights waited for an answer he would never give. We prepare, he said. We remember. And we stand our ground. Mercy hummed in agreement. The winter solstice arrived with bitter winds and thin, sharp light. The morning dawned clear and cold, revealing the elven army at the forest's edge. Not 12 knights, but hundreds. Their armor caught the sunrise and threw it back in fractured rainbows, beautiful and terrible. Waylon watched from the village wall, Mercy singing softly at his side. He wasn't surprised by the elven force's size, only by the hollow feeling in his chest. Not fear, but a strange resignation. Saren joined him on the wall, his golden eyes scanning the assembled elven host. The Eternal Court has committed its full ceremonial guard, he said, his voice tight. Those are not border troops. They're the elite. The Starlight Vanguard. Can they be defeated? In conventional battle? No. Saren's directness was one of the qualities Waylon had come to value most. But this isn't conventional, is it? He nodded toward the village square, where 50 humans now stood with soul steel blades at their sides. Each weapon hummed with its own distinct note, creating a harmony that vibrated through the morning air. They were an unlikely fighting force, farmers and smiths, healers and hunters, but they stood straight-backed and clear-eyed, their hands resting on hilts that sang with the voices of their beloved dead. Shall I attempt to parley? Saren asked. Would they listen to an exile? No, Saren admitted, but they might listen to you. Waylon considered the suggestion. Part of him, the part that still burned with grief over his mother's murder, wanted to refuse. But another part, the part that carried mercy, knew that blood should never be the first choice. Very well, he decided, but not to surrender, to understand. They descended from the wall together, Waylon and the elven exile, and walked toward the midpoint between village and forest. 3 elves detached themselves from the main force to meet them, 2 armored knights flanking a taller figure in flowing silver robes embroidered with stars. "The High Commander," Saren whispered. "This isn't a punitive expedition. It's a formal campaign." The elven commander removed her helmet as they approached, revealing features of such austere beauty they seemed almost cruel. Her eyes were not gold like Saren's, but a pale, luminous blue that reminded Waylon of ice over deep water. "Soulbinder!" She greeted him, her common tongue perfect but heavily accented. "I am Ethereal, voice of the Eternal Court, commander of the Starlight Vanguard." Her gaze shifted dismissively to Saren. "Exile. Your presence is noted, but irrelevant." "Commander," Waylon acknowledged, ignoring the slight to his friend. "Have you come to make war on farmers?" "I have come to correct an imbalance," she said. "To ensure natural order remains intact, the dead should rest," Ethereal said, "rather than being bound to metal and memory." Her gaze dropped to Mercy. "That abomination at your hip, do you truly believe the spirit within it remains willingly?" "I know she does," Waylon said simply. "Because the blade tells you so?" Ethereal's voice held the first hint of genuine emotion, scorn. "A convenient claim when you alone hear its voice." "Not alone," Saren interjected. "I hear them too." "Another convenient claim," Ethereal said. She returned her attention to Waylon. "The court's position remains unchanged." Waylon felt Mercy hum against his leg, not in fear or anger, but in firm negation. "The blades aren't mine to surrender," he said. "They belong to those who carry them, and to the souls who inhabit them." "Then you choose war," Ethereal said, the words falling like stones. "I will give you until midday to reconsider." As they walked back to the village, Saren spoke quietly. "Did you see how she looked at Mercy? With," he searched for the word, "longing." Waylon considered this as they passed through the village gates. In the center of the square stood Bren, leaning heavily on a staff. The old smith had grown frail in recent months, his good eye clouded, his breathing labored. But his voice remained strong as he called to Waylon. "Well, lad, will they say reason?" "Their kind of reason," Waylon answered. "Surrender or die." Bren nodded, unsurprised. "Then we fight." He gestured to the defenders. "These good folk have agreed to a plan, while you are making nice with the tree folk." "What plan?" The old smith smiled, a fierce expression on his weathered face. "We wake the old ones." The ancient forge was hidden deep in the mountains behind Sarn, a 3-hour climb up narrow paths half reclaimed by the forest. According to Bren, it was the original site where soul steel had first been created, centuries before the last border war. "The old smiths hid their knowledge here," he explained as they climbed, his breath coming in harsh gasps. "When both sides agreed to ban soul forging. Not destroyed, hidden, waiting." By we, Bren had meant himself, Waylon, Saren, and a dozen defenders chosen for their strength and determination. The rest stayed in the village, preparing what defenses they could against the coming assault. The path grew steeper as they ascended, winding between ancient pines whose branches blocked the winter sun. Snow crunched beneath their boots, pristine and unmarked. No one had walked this way in living memory. "How do you know where to go?" Waylon asked, supporting Bren's frail form as they navigated a particularly treacherous section.
"The blades always remember,"
the old smith said cryptically.
"They sang me the way in dreams."
At a certain point, the path vanished entirely. Bren halted, leaning heavily on his staff, and pointed to a sheer rock face overgrown with ivy.
"There."
Saren stepped forward, his elven sight better suited to finding patterns in the green tangle.
"I see it,"
he confirmed. "A door, hidden by time and nature." Together, they cleared the ivy, revealing a stone arch carved with symbols similar to those Bren had shown Waylon on the soul steel diagrams. The door itself was iron, black with age, but untouched by rust.
"How do we open it?"
one of the defenders asked. Bren turned to Waylon.
"With memory," he said. "With recognition."
Understanding, Waylon drew mercy. The sword hummed in his grip, its song rising in pitch as he held it toward the door. After a moment's hesitation, the other defenders drew their soul steel blades as well. The combined song of the swords filled the forest clearing, not chaotic, but harmonized, as though each blade knew its part in a greater chorus. The sound vibrated through the stone, through the iron, through the bone and blood. With a groan of ancient hinges, the door swung inward. Beyond lay darkness and the scent of cold stone. Bren fumbled with his pack, producing a lantern, which Saren quickly lit. The elven exile stepped across the threshold first, holding the light high.
"By the stars,"
he breathed. The others crowded forward, gasping as the lantern illuminated the chamber beyond. It was vast, far larger than seemed possible given the mountain's exterior, and filled with swords. Hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, hanging from the walls, standing in racks, embedded in stone like the legendary blade waiting for a fated king. Each one was soul steel. Each one hummed with a distinct note, creating a symphony that pressed against the skin like physical touch.
"Forgotten blades,"
Bren said, his voice thick with emotion.
"The ones they tried to erase from memory."
Waylon moved deeper into the chamber, drawn by a sword mounted centrally on the far wall. Unlike the others, this blade was not dark, but a deep burnished copper, its surface etched with the flowing script.
"The first,"
Bren confirmed, following Waylon's gaze.
"Forged by Hallan the Smith for his wife, Saria, who died protecting their child from wolves."
As they approached the copper blade, its song changed, becoming louder, more insistent. Not a hum now, but a voice, whispering words just beyond comprehension.
"She's been waiting," Bren said. "They all have, waiting for someone to remember them."
Waylon reached toward the sword, hesitating with his hand just short of the hilt. "May I?" he asked, the question directed at the blade itself. The sword's song softened, becoming almost welcoming. Taking it as permission, Waylon carefully lifted the weapon from its mount. It was lighter than he expected, perfectly balanced despite its ancient design. And the moment his fingers closed around the grip, he heard her, not in his ears, but in his mind. A grown woman's voice, strong and clear despite the centuries. "You have come at last," she said. "The one who remembers." "I am not worthy of that title," Waylon replied aloud. "I only found what was lost." "That is remembering," the voice insisted. "That is enough." Saren stepped closer, his golden eyes wide with wonder. "You hear her clearly?" Waylon nodded. "Her name is Saria. She's been waiting a very long time." "Too long," Saria agreed. "But now the waiting ends. Now we fight." "Against the elves?" Waylon asked. "Against forgetting," she corrected. "The elves have forgotten what we died protecting. They have forgotten that death is not an ending, but a transformation. They have forgotten that love transcends flesh. Her words resonated with something Waylon had felt since forging Mercy. That soul steel wasn't about binding souls, but allowing love to endure beyond death. About remembering fully, completely, with all the pain that entailed. "Will you help us?" he asked. "We will remind them," Saria promised. "All of us." As if in response, the other sword's songs grew louder, creating a chorus that filled the vast chamber. Not chaotic, but harmonized. 1,000 voices speaking as one. Bren moved among the racks, running gnarled fingers over ancient hilts.
"These blades were carried by our ancestors in the last border war," he said. "Before the treaty that banned soul forging. Before the elves convinced us to forget our own strength."
"How do we carry them all?" one of the defenders asked practically. "There are thousands."
"We don't," Bren said. "They carry themselves."
And as if his words were a signal, the nearest swords began to rise, not floating through magic, but standing upright, their points against the stone floor, their hilts swaying as though held by invisible hands. "We remember the way," Saria whispered in Waylon's mind. "We remember how to fight." They returned to Sarn just as the midday sun broke through the winter clouds. The village square was eerily empty, the defenders having taken positions along the walls or in designated strong points. Only Bren remained in the open, leaning on his staff in the center of the square. The elven army had advanced to within bowshot of the village, their silver armor gleaming. At their head rode Ethereal, her helmet removed again, her pale eyes fixed on the human settlement with cold determination. "Last chance, old man," she called to Bren. "Surrender the abominations." Bren's laugh was a dry rasp.
"Come and take them, child," he retorted. "If you can."
Ethereal's perfect features hardened. She raised a hand, signaling to her forces. Elven archers knocked arrows tipped with starlight metal, drawing their bows in perfect unison. "Fire!" she commanded. 100 arrows rose, describing elegant arcs against the winter sky. But before they could descend, a sound arose from the village. Not battle cries or screams, but singing. The harmonized voices of 100 soul steel blades, rising in chorus. The arrows faltered mid-flight as though encountering an invisible barrier. Some shattered. Others veered off course, embedding themselves harmlessly in the frozen ground. Ethereal's composure cracked. "What trickery is this?" she demanded. Bren's smile was triumphant.
"No trickery,"
he called back.
"Memory."
And then, from behind the village walls they came, the ancient soul steel blades, moving without visible wielders. They passed through the gates and formed a silent phalanx before the village, hilts swaying as though held by phantom hands. The elven host faltered, perfect formation wavering at the impossible sight.
"Sorcery!"
Ethereal spat. "Corruption of the natural order!" "No!" came Waylon's voice as he emerged from the village gate, Mercy at his side and Saria in his hand. "Just remembrance!" The ancient swords advanced, their song growing louder. Where they passed, frost melted from the ground. Grass greened, flowers pushed through snow. Life responding to memory. The elven archers released another volley. This time, the soul steel blades rose to meet it, batting arrows aside with precise movements. Not a single shaft reached the village. "Infantry, advance!" Ethereal commanded, her voice tight with fury. The elven soldiers moved forward in perfect unison, drawing gleaming swords that caught the winter light and fractured it into rainbows. But as soon as they approached the waiting soul steel blades, their precision faltered. Some slowed, eyes wide with confusion. Others stopped entirely, lowering their weapons. "What are you doing?" Ethereal demanded. "Forward!"
"Commander!"
one of the elven captains called back.
"The sword! They're speaking! They're calling to us by name!"
Waylon understood then what was happening. The ancient blades weren't just defending. They were communicating, reaching across the divide between elf and human, between living and dead, between memory and oblivion. "We remember you," they sang. "We remember when we fought side by side, before the divisions. We remember when elf and human were allies."
"Lies,"
Ethereal snarled.
"Deception's meant to weaken resolve."
But her soldiers hesitated, caught between her commands and the songs that called to something deeper than loyalty to the eternal court. In the moment of uncertainty, Waylon strode forward, Mercy humming at his hip and Saria singing in his hand. Saren followed, unarmed but resolute. "Commander!" Waylon called. "Let us end this without bloodshed. The swords remember what your histories have forgotten. That humans and elves once stood together against greater enemies. That we can do so again."
"Never!"
Ethereal declared, drawing her own sword, a blade of such perfection it seemed to be made of captured starlight rather than metal.
"The court has decreed that soul steel must be destroyed. That the natural order must be maintained."
"What natural order?" Saren demanded, stepping forward. "The one where elves rule and humans starve? The one where we pretend death is an ending rather than a transition? The one where we fear emotion so deeply we can't bear to remember it?" His words struck something in the elven ranks. Murmurs spread through the perfect formation, ripples in a still pond. Ethereal's expression hardened. "Silence, exile," she commanded. "Your treachery is noted." "It's not treachery to question," Saren responded. "Only to blindly follow." The commander's patience snapped. With a cry of frustration, she charged forward, her perfect blade raised, not toward Wylan or Saren, but toward Bren, the old smith who stood alone and vulnerable in the square. Waylon shouted a warning, but he was too far to intervene. The soul steel blades sang in alarm, surging forward, but they too would arrive too late. Bren faced the charging commander without fear, his roomy eyes clear, his expression almost peaceful. As Ethereal's sword descended, he raised his hand, not in defense, but in welcome. The starlight blade passed through him with terrible efficiency. Bren's body crumpled, blood staining the winter ground, his staff clattering beside him. "No!" Waylon's cry tore from his throat, raw with grief and rage. Mercy keened at his hip, a sound of pure anguish. Ethereal stood over Bren's fallen form, her perfect blade slick with human blood. "See the weakness of your kind," she called to the defenders. "How easily you break! How completely you end!" But as she spoke, something impossible happened. Bren's blood, pooling on the frozen ground, began to move. Not spreading randomly, but flowing in deliberate patterns. Runes similar to those etched on soul steel blades formed around the commander's feet, glowing with subtle inner light. And Bren's voice, impossibly, rose from the silence.
"The final lesson, lad,"
it whispered, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere.
"The ultimate forging."
The runes flared brighter. Ethereal tried to step away, but found herself rooted, her perfect boots somehow bound to the blood-inscribed circle.
"What trickery is this?"
she demanded, her composure cracking for the first time.
"Release me!" "Not trickery,"
came Bren's voice again.
"Just the oldest form of soul steel. Not a blade, but a binding. A reminder."
The blood runes pulsed once, twice, then flowed upward, impossibly defying gravity, to encircle Ethereal's starlight sword. The perfect metal sizzled where the blood touched it, not marring its surface, but changing it somehow, altering its fundamental nature.
"What are you doing?"
Ethereal cried, trying to release the hilt but finding her fingers locked around it.
"Giving you what you lack,"
Bren's voice replied gently.
"Memory."
The transformation completed in seconds. Where the starlight blade had been coldly perfect, it now held a subtle depth. Still beautiful, still deadly, but no longer empty. And from its length came a sound elven weapons had never made before. A low, resonant hum that vibrated through the winter air. Ethereal stared at her transformed sword in horror and fascination.
"What have you done to it?"
Not to it, Waylon said, understanding at last. To you. The commander's pale eyes widened as the sword's song deepened. Her perfect features contorted. Not in pain, but in an emotion far more complex. Grief. Recognition. Remembrance. You hear it now, Waylon continued, approaching slowly. The voice your kind has denied for centuries. The memory you chose to forget. Tears, perhaps the first she had shed in her long life, tracked down Ethereal's perfect cheeks.
"It speaks," she whispered. "It remembers me."
All blades remember their wielders, Waylon said, but only Soulsteel speaks that memory aloud. The transformed sword hummed in Ethereal's grip, its song shifting from mourning to something almost like joy, the sound of recognition, of connection long denied. Around them, the elven host watched in stunned silence as their commander communed with her changed weapon. The soul-steel blades that had risen to defend the village settled, their songs quieting to a gentle murmur. This is what you feared, Saren said, addressing not just Ethereal, but all the assembled elven soldiers. Not that Soulsteel would bind souls against their will, but that it would remind you of what you lost in your pursuit of perfection. The connection between memory and feeling, between past and present. Ethereal lowered her transformed blade slowly, her tear-streaked face revealing an emotion no human had ever seen on an elven countenance. Wonder, tinged with regret.
"We thought it was abomination,"
she said softly.
"But it was remembrance. All along."
The battle that never truly began now definitively ended. The elven soldiers lowered their weapons, many looking at their perfect, silent blades, with new understanding. The human defenders emerged cautiously from the village, Soulsteel humming at their sides. Waylon knelt beside Bren's body, grief heavy in his chest. You knew, he said to the empty air. You planned this. Of course he did, came Saren's gentle voice, as he joined Waylon. The old fox was always 3 steps ahead. He didn't have to die. Perhaps not, Saren agreed, but he chose to. On his terms. For a purpose. He touched Waylon's shoulder. The greatest gift he could offer. Waylon thought of the choice Bren had made. To become not a blade, but a bridge. To use his own death as a final lesson. A final forging. It was a sacrifice beyond anything Waylon had imagined possible. I could bind him, he said, the words barely audible. Create a blade to carry his memory. Is that what he would want? Saren asked gently. Waylon closed his eyes, listening not with his ears, but with his heart. He heard no calling from Bren's spirit. No desire to remain. Only a profound sense of completion. A circle closed. No, he admitted finally. He would want to rest. As if in confirmation, Mercy hummed softly at his hip, a sound not of grief, but of acceptance. of letting go. Ethereal approached them, her transformed sword quiet now at her side. Her face, still streaked with tears, had lost some of its inhuman perfection. She looked older, wiser. "The smith's sacrifice will be honored," she said formally. "The court must know what has happened here today. Not human defiance, but human wisdom." She hesitated, then added, "I cannot promise peace, but I can promise remembrance." "That's enough," Waylon said, rising to his feet. "Remembrance is where peace begins." The elven commander nodded once, acknowledging the truth in his words. "You will not forge more soul steel?" she asked, the question genuine rather than demanding. Waylon looked around at the ancient blades that had risen to defend the village, at the soul steel carried by the human defenders, at Mercy humming faithfully at his side. He thought of all the souls within them, not trapped, but transformed, not ending, but continuing. "No," he decided. "There are enough memories in the world already. We need only listen to them." Spring came again to Sarn. The village rebuilt what had been damaged in preparation for a battle that never truly occurred. The ancient soul steel blades were returned to their mountain sanctuary, not hidden this time, but preserved. A testament to the memory rather than a secret to be feared. Waylon stood at the new forge he had built on the village's edge, not for soul steel, that chapter had closed, but for tools, for plowshares, for the implements of life rather than war. Mercy hung on the wall nearby, her song a gentle counterpoint to the rhythm of his hammer. Later, as twilight softened the edges of the world, Waylon stood alone at his mother's grave. Mercy hung at his hip, her song gentle and familiar. "They say I bound you," he said softly to the humming blade. "But I think you bound me. To purpose." The sword's song shifted, becoming almost chiding, the sound of a mother correcting a beloved child. "I know," he acknowledged. "Not bound, reminded." He touched the hilt lightly. "Will you stay, now that the danger has passed?" Mercy's hum deepened, became more complex. Neither yes nor no, but a different answer entirely. A reminder that presence and absence weren't absolute states, that memory blurred the boundaries between them. "For as long as needed, then," Waylon interpreted. "Until I remember on my own." As darkness fell, he made his way back toward the village. Behind him, silent but watchful, the ghost of a healer walked, not trapped, not bound, but choosing to remain. And somewhere in the deep mountain forge, ancient swords sang softly to themselves, waiting for a time when their memories would be needed again, not as weapons, but as witnesses, not as instruments of war, but as testaments to what remained when everything else was lost. The truth that humans had always known, and elves had fought so hard to forget. That beauty without flaw is empty. Perfection without pain is meaningless. And memory, with all its jagged edges and tender wounds, is the only immortality any of us ever truly claim.